Far Cry 2. It's not just a game, it's a statement. A sophisticated commentary on our westernized perception of the war-torn countries of Africa through the state known as the UAC, the unknown African country. A land so foreign and unknown to us that the behaviors of its inhabitants, down to the general landscape and even the laws of physics, will seem completely alien to the average Westoid. Everything from the random stalker anomalies that these people are subject to on a day-to-day basis, threatening to bring a swift, unjust end to their already laborious way of life, to the mere subtle mannerisms in which the citizens of this hell on earth partake, in a fruitless attempt to adapt to their cruel environment. Always on edge, never letting the enemy know their next move. You begin this pointless struggle as a man, one of a choice of 9 in fact. I decided to embody Frank. Him being from Northern Ireland, as I knew I was about to start acting the Mickey as soon as I got my hands on any sort of weapon. Frank, in this case, is a mercenary.
You want this nut?
Dropped into the UAC to eliminate a notorious arms dealer responsible for supplying cheap and reliable weapons to the two factions actively engaged in war against each other in the region. However, things began to take a strange turn mere moments after his arrival. Were the people here actively taunting him? Perhaps they could tell by the way he was dressed that he was up to no good. Perhaps he was just seeing things. After all, Frank is a bit of a cretin, made evident by the fact that he thought it would be wise to travel to Africa without any malaria medication. You know, only like one of the top 5 causes of death in the region. So he passes out in the capital city of Pala, and after some amount of time wakes up to who else but the arms dealer he was sent to kill standing over him. You can tell that the malaria's got Frank really fucked up right now because he hears everything in the form of a compressed 32 kilobit MP3 file.
You can tell them you tried, but that means fuck all, doesn't it?
The jackal shows off his superior intellect by yapping about some book he's read, then promptly leaves Frank without killing him. Classic mistake. Frank then goes postal, dies, and wakes up in some shack in a swamp. Once you leave this place, the vast open lands of the UAC are open to your exploitation. After briefly ripping off my summer car and doing some introductory bitch work, the core gameplay loop of Far Cry 2 starts to rear its face. I hope that you find it to be easy on the eyes, because the game really doesn't deviate much from this basic formula. Step 1. Accept a mission. There is a limited number of different quest givers scattered across the UAC, including these classic Ubisoft trademarked radio towers, and the occasional missions you can get from gun dealers that unlock new equipment when complete. But for the most part, this step is going to involve traveling back to the demilitarized central village of Pala. Like any other MMORPG, Pala serves as the hub area for not only the player, but also for the two warring factions that are actively engaged in brutal conflict with each other. Soldiers of the UFLL and the APR alike come together here in peace and harmony, their headquarters practically just across the street from one another, putting aside their ambitions of power over their nation to shoot the shit, smoke cigarettes, and occasionally to find a nice quiet place to pass away of natural causes. As far as the player is concerned though, Pala is the place to be for any aspiring gun for hire. The leaders of these two factions are practically chomping at the bits to give out suicide missions in exchange for rough diamonds in advance to any ethically ambiguous outsider that manages to stumble their way into the town. Step 2. Travel to said mission. This is going to make up something like 80% of your playtime. The 50 square kilometer map of the UAC was quite novel for the time it came out. In comparison, Tess for Oblivion's depiction of Cyrodiil was around 41 kilometers square. That's all well and good, but the thing about Oblivion was that you didn't have to traverse the entire map for literally every quest. Pala, the primary mission hub, is placed right in the middle of the map in Far Cry 2. And the game really likes to give you objectives close to the borders of the playable area. So your choices are to either get well acquainted with the country's underdeveloped public transport services, which is what I ended up doing after just a handful of missions, or you jump in a car and do things the right way. We'll get back to that. Step 3. Complete your mission. This is probably one of the few gameplay aspects in which Far Cry 2 manages to stand the test of time. Each mission in the game is varied enough, both in setting and objective variety, to keep you from getting bored. One minute you're sent out to assassinate a prominent warlord, and in the next you're tasked with destroying a faction's fuel supply, unintentionally creating a region-wide disaster in the process. Once you've done that, travel back to Pala and start the cycle all over again. Pretty basic, all things considered, but then again, one has to bear in mind that what we now know and despise as the Ubisoft open-world game design model was really quite new and unique when this game first came out. And that's great. I really love that for you, King. It doesn't change the fact that coming back to Far Cry 2 now, the cracks are really starting to show. Don't worry, I have a lot of positive things to say about Far Cry 2, but there are a few things that, when I look back at the game now, have always bugged me. Obviously, if you haven't figured it out already, my game isn't exactly running as intended. If you find that the glitched out NPC animations really bother you, then you can fix it by running the game at 60Hz with VSync. I prefer having the higher refresh rate because I'm completely PC brained now. And let's be honest, bugs like this make playthroughs 100 times more XD funny. Scientifically speaking, it's really the traveling back and forth between missions that got stale for me very quickly. And it's not for the reasons you might think. 50 square kilometers isn't as big as it sounds. It really doesn't take that long to get from one end of the map to the other, especially when the game spawns cars everywhere in an effort to make sure you never have to walk anywhere for more than 60 seconds. That's probably a good thing too, because Frank is so fucking out of shape that he damn near suffers a cardiac arrest aneurysm combo after just a 10-second sprint. This is meant to be the hero of the UAC, guys. Fucking fat bastard from Austin Powers. In theory then, it shouldn't take up that much of your time to go from one mission to the next if the driving distances aren't that long. Well, allow me to introduce to you the Far Cry 2 guard posts. These are placed on pretty much every intersection that isn't already near another point of interest, with a few dotted around random points on some of the roads for good measure. If you want to go anywhere in Far Cry 2, you will have to drive past at least one of these guard posts, though realistically you'll be going through many more than this. The soldiers guarding them are always hostile, have absurdly good engine block aim even on normal difficulty, and will very often relentlessly pursue you if you try to just drive past them. And that's if you even manage to get past without getting your car absolutely shot up to shit in the first place. It is very rare that you will come across a guard post with enough room around it to be able to drive past without being noticed. You can, of course, get out of your car and sneak past more easily that way, but then you'd of course have to accept the inferior whipless lifestyle and pray that you can find another vehicle somewhere down the road that isn't guarded by more enemies. The result of this is a lot of tedium. Anytime you drive up to a guard post, you have to clear it of enemies, either by getting out of your car or by jumping up to your mounted machine gun and mowing every last one of them down. Because if you leave even one of them alive, they will find the nearest car and try to run you off the road. Leave more than that and they'll be blasting machine gun fire into your engine while they do it. Well, okay, at least that's done now. The guard post has already been unlocked, so there shouldn't be any trouble on my way back into Pala, right? I don't exactly know how the game decides when to spawn guards at checkpoints, but I can definitely say that I've returned to guard posts I'd just cleared moments prior to find them completely back to business as usual. My guess is that either the map is divided into different chunks that load different things when the player passes through, or everything gets reset when you complete an objective. So what the fuck is the point of unlocking the guard posts exactly? Oh, I see, it's to show you what type of supplies you can find there. The same supplies I'm going to have to use to clear the checkpoint again in the first place. That's really kind of you, game. Now, complaining about this is kind of like beating a dead zebra. It would only take until the next release in the series for Ubisoft to realize that this whole gameplay loop wasn't all that fun. Far Cry 3 actually allowed the player to capture checkpoints and villages to ensure that the pirates in that game could no longer spawn there. It also makes a lot of sense thematically in that game, seeing how the whole point is to liberate those islands from their presence. I would have liked to show you actual footage of me doing this in the game, but Ubisoft didn't feel like sending out any verification emails today. Fucking prick. Far Cry 2 is a little different in the way that you're not trying to liberate the UAC. You're really only sent in to kill one guy. I don't think your actions should carry as much impact as being able to indefinitely secure a guard post or village by yourself. It's a civil war after all, with what is probably tens of thousands of combatants on each side, ready to be called in as reinforcements. But at least put some sort of timer on them before you spawn the guards back in, man. Like, with the game having a whole day and night cycle where you can sleep to pass the time, it would be cool if it took at least a couple of in-game hours for them to redeploy. Shit, maybe even make it so that some of the checkpoints are unmanned in the middle of the night, to actually give that whole mechanic a little bit more depth than just making it harder for you to be spotted when sneaking around. I know it's kind of funny at face value to complain about this. I can see the comment now. He's playing a shooter and complaining that he has to kill people! But I can guarantee that if you go back and try to play this game, these guard posts will start to really get on your nerves. It's just a stupid feature to slow you down from progressing through the game too quickly and to waste as much of your ammo as possible. You really gain nothing for your trouble with these fights, which, funnily enough again, is a lesson they learned and implemented into the very next game in the series through experience and skill mechanics. My thumb was basically stuck to the C button whenever I had to drive somewhere because there was always a 100% chance that I was going to have to crawl back to the machine gun on my truck. I was always completely engaged in this stellar bit of gameplay, guys, I promise. There's only really one other thing left to criticize, and it's to do with the enemy AI. I do have to mention that their hit scan weapons can get really annoying. Getting shot through tall grass that completely obscures my vision, or when I peek the very fucking tip of my big ass forehead over a hill, or when enemies manage to get shots on me the instant they come out from around cover was somewhat of a recurring theme. It would be a bigger issue if they did more damage and if healing syringes were harder to come by, but it's nonetheless something I found at least a little frustrating upon coming back to this game. But I think that's enough bitching for one video. Far Cry 2 definitely shows its age in some of its game design. Who would have guessed after almost 16 years? But despite all of that, I still came out on the other side of this adventure with some good vibes to spare. Because Far Cry 2 does a handful of things very well. Things that Ubisoft would go on to struggle recreating, or just outright abandoning with all future games. Africa is a criminally underutilized continent when it comes to all media really, not just video games. It's home to so many different types of environments emanating this natural beauty, and yet it's somehow often forgotten about. Far Cry 2 is a great example of just how great of a setting this can be. The game's graphical fidelity was very impressive 16 years ago, but I was surprised upon returning to it to see just how well the Dunya engine managed to age. This is probably most noticeable with the high-resolution textures on everything from the desert sand around the edges of the map, right down to the different fabrics and materials found in the interiors of the many different vehicles you can find. But it's really the lighting changes caused by the day and night cycle that I found to be the most impressive. Sunrises and sunsets look genuinely incredible, radiating this orange hue across the hazy sky, casting these shadows that give everything in the world a greater sense of depth and definition. It's great that the HUD elements are hidden away until you need them in combat. It really allows you to take in all of this atmosphere in your downtime. All to the tune of the original soundtrack composed by Mark Canham, which makes use of strings and African percussion instruments to create the perfect ambient score for this setting you could ask for as far as I'm concerned. Of the different terrain types, I think the jungle sections hold up the worst, though even they can have their moments, especially near some of the lakes and rivers. I still appreciate having all of these different environments to run around in though. They can make the map feel a lot bigger than it really is. This is one of those things I think Ubisoft unfortunately gave up on with the series from this point that I miss quite a bit. To be fair, I have not played Far Cry 4, so the map in that game may be a lot more varied. But for the third and fifth games in the series, I kind of felt like they went, okay, this is the tropical island game, and this is the mountainous boreal one. They may be technically divided into different areas, but none of them really look that strikingly different from one another. In my opinion, Far Cry 2 is also the most successful game in the series when it comes to creating its own sense of identity, or for lack of a better word, a unique aesthetic. The aesthetics of Far Cry 2 is a great video to watch if you want a far more in-depth look at all of the different choices made on the artistic side of things. It's also not the first time I've mentioned a Face Full of Eyes video on this channel. The game makes great utility of its Civil War setting through a lot of different details, each small on their own, but they pay off in making this game feel like what is probably the most immersive world in the series. For instance, I cannot think of a single other first-person shooter game before Far Cry 2 that featured a weapon condition mechanic. Going back to the game now, I can appreciate this decision. even if I low-key hated it back when the game first came out. I was something like 10 years old at the time, to be fair, and I just wanted to be able to use all the cool guns I was finding. Weapons you pick up off of dead enemies are always in bad condition. You can use them in a pinch, but they will start to jam on you during firefights sooner rather than later, even eventually just straight up exploding in your hands if you put too much faith into them for too long. There is no way to repair any of your weapons in the game, which kind of felt like an oversight to me initially. Even the brand new weapons you buy in the gun stores will eventually wear out over time, and the only thing you can do is just replace it with a new one, again at the store, with no extra cost. I think the goal the game is trying to achieve is to show just how economically screwed this region is. There is an active struggle for power between two groups of rebels, both in need of weapons but none wealthy enough to buy anything of real quality. The Jackal shows up and starts selling these cheap, barely functioning weapons to both sides of the civil war. So cheap in fact that it's actually cheaper and more practical to just replace these weapons with quote-unquote new ones once they've inevitably been run into the ground. There's no industrial power behind any of these two groups. Hell, there isn't even a real currency. No greater cohesion that would even allow for steady supplies to be driven out to their fighters. They're not organized militaries, they're desperate guerrillas. They use the shitty, degraded weapons they have because there is no other alternative. That's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to how Far Cry 2's game design ties into the overall narrative of the game's story. I'd be lying if I said I didn't want to go on about this for another half an hour, but it already takes me way too long to make these videos with the limited amount of time I have to work on them. The amount of effort that went into designing this world is really worthy of praise. Far Cry 2 may not be the best game in the series. If I was to rate it on gameplay alone, well, people wouldn't be too happy. But not only did Far Cry 2 act as a strong foundation for all future games in the series, it's also the one game that pulls me to replaying it the most. It's really out of the ordinary that I can talk about a first-person shooter where it's not the gameplay that keeps me coming back, but instead the world that it's set in. And yet, there goes Ubisoft, pulling it off in 2008. Now if you could unlock my account, that would be real fucking. I've been Scav Merchant Hub, and I am fresh out of malaria medication. Shit.
I want you to subscribe to me.
Scav Merchant Hub.
On YouTube, thank you, cringe. Bye.